There are secrets out there, guys, performance marketing secrets, and knowing just one or two of them can absolutely light up your funnels. Let's go. This is the Revenue Driven CMO. I'm your host, Chris Mechanic. Join me as I uncover the secrets of the world's most elite CMOs and marketing leaders. The Revenue Driven CMO is sponsored by Web Mechanics, the AI driven performance agency that makes you smarter. So
Yeah.
why don't you let everybody know, like, what is one of your biggest secrets to success?
Well, thank you for that, Chris. And I know when we were chatting about this, the first thing that came into my mind was customer empathy. And I know a lot of times people will say, put the customer at the center, start with the customer. I think a lot of times it really is hard to do, right? And for CMOs, you have to really kind of put a process in place and make it a part of you. You have to carve out time to focus on it. So, a few things that I'll share with your audience and other CMOs and aspiring CMOs is that right, first is to really build true customer empathy. You have to start with actually listening to customer calls, talking to customers. And a lot of times it's easier said than done, but always start off, particularly if I join a company and it's a newer industry to me, I really want to take the time to understand the customer's motivations in that particular industry. So listening to sales calls, right? As many of these recorded calls on Gong and Chorus.ai, etc. Listen to as many as you possibly can. Literally carve out 10-15% of your initial onboarding time to do that. And do it consistently, right? Because that really helps you build the understanding of not only your company, but the market and also get into the mind of the customers. That would be A. The second part is after you collect some of that information is actually go and talk to customers. Work with your sales team, your customer success team, if they're leverage existing calls that they may already have scheduled, like a quarterly check-in call. See if you can get introduced and hop on those, introduce yourself, really kind of start to build that connection with the customer. And then the third and the most important part is then taking all of this great intel that you just received from talking to customers and listening to calls, and you want to apply it into a storytelling framework. I personally love Donald Miller's Building a Story brand. That's one example. There are other, different types of formats as well. But you really want to start thinking about how do you now take all of this great learning and articulate it in your company messaging, etc. So I think that part is really important.
Brilliant. I love that. I've got several questions. You touched on some things and sparked some ideas as you were talking, but I think it's really brilliant to first speak with the customers and then use their actual language to craft that story. I think that, well, I know actually that some marketers do it backwards. They'll basically do market research. They might like read some, reviews or do some reading. But we had a guest on not not too long ago that was kind of griping that, hey, like, she was actually more on the sales side, and she was like, hey, the
Mhm.
messages that the marketing team is using, like, the value props are not really hitting. It wasn't really her topic, but it is a mistake that a lot of people make, I think. So I love that, and I was surprised. So 10 to 15% of the initial onboarding time sounds like a lot. I think that's way more than what most people do. I'm curious, this is sort of a tactical question, but, like, say that
Yeah, no
say that
problem.
you're going into Gong or you're going into Chorus and you're looking for these calls. There's hundreds of them, right? Thousands of them
Mhm.
potentially. How do you decide which ones to listen to? Like, where are you going
Yeah.
first?
Absolutely. There's a few ways you can look at this, which is if you can correlate it to, let's say, deal size, and you want to get a good sampling of, depending on the market that your company sells to. I usually start off with a few things. So Know Before has an incredible training onboarding program. They actually incorporate customer calls into part of it. So I would say even as a marketing team, if you can influence your kind of internal enablement, training division, HR to include some of these like signature calls in your onboarding, do that, right? So Know Before does that, which is awesome. If you don't have that, one of the things that you could do is while you talk to your sales and your customer success leaders, is ask them like, hey, what was like the deal you were most proud of, last quarter or this past year? And then you could try to correlate it to deal size. Maybe it was a multi-year renewal, right? So those are all really good signals to kind of listen to and listen to those calls. The other side is you don't want to just overly indexed on the positive. Also, if you can, look at some of the key deals that you lost and look at, if those calls were recorded, and see if you can pick up a couple of signals on the sort of why you've lost it. And I think a lot of times that win loss, we're very data driven now. The whole marketing world is very data driven. So we'll look at things on a spreadsheet, in a report, in a dashboard. But I've often find that it nothing beats actually just talking to customers. And there are customers that I've met 20 years ago at companies that are doing completely different things, and we're still friends and say hi and chat. And sometimes they'll come along and to the next company I'm at. So a lot of times that relationship and building that bond is so important. But listening to those calls, I mean, I would look at those things, the top deals, the ones that you lost, and try to see if you can find any kind of common ground there. Like sometimes it could be the same thing that is both a positive and a negative, but then that becomes a thread you can pull on.
Mhm. No, that makes a ton of sense. Um, I'm curious, uh, it's crossed my desk a couple times recently. There's firms that do like closed loss deal analysis where like they will call closed loss deals, and I think it's incentivized. I think they offer the client, a $50 gift card or something, to get that type of feedback. And their value prop or in their pitch, they're like, hey, when you call your customer, like they're gonna pull some punches, like whether they're polite or for whatever reason, like they're not necessarily going to give you the whole deal. And the value prop of these firms that were pitching me was like, hey, we'll get at the full story. Have Do you ever use a third party to do any of that, or have you gotten the sense that the like when you're actually speaking one on one with somebody, that they are very open and willing to give you feedback even around some of the negatives?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it all comes from how you approach it. So, Chris, to answer your question, I've definitely used those firms before. They're great, right? Because a lot of times you do want that sort of, it neutralizes it when you come from a third party perspective. They're not affiliated with the company. Certainly in my past at other companies, we use some of these firms, and you get intel that you wouldn't have known otherwise, right? Like, again, this is love our sales reps, right? There's no knock on sales. There was one customer, I remember this very vividly. I mean, we lost a deal. They didn't share all the details with our sales rep, of course. But when the third party called, it was, well, your sales rep was on the phone the entire time and wasn't paying attention. And we just felt disrespected. You would not have gotten that from the company directly, right? The other way is, this is why I advocate for executives to do executive sponsorship of key deals. I've personally done that before too, because then you're coming at it from a different angle. And so if I went and talked to the customer, I would ask questions in a different way to kind of say, hey, we're really looking to improve, and how your suggestions are so valuable to helping us improve. I know we weren't able to work together this time, but you never know in the future. And so it's all about how do you approach it. You never want to close that door, because you just never know. People move around a lot, and companies change direction, and you never know.
Why don't you share with the audience, like, what is one of your biggest and best kept secrets to success in marketing?
Well, I think good marketers are a little bit voyeuristic in that we like to watch and really observe what's going on. And so I think the key for me, the way that I've always done it, is to try to be kind of invisible, but still present until the customer is in a position that they want to talk to you, and then make it seem like you've been there forever. So I think right now you've got a lot of brands that are creating a lot of noise and frankly confusion in the marketplace, whatever space you're in, particularly in the space that I'm in, software. By like buy me, try me, all this sort of very loud, clanging cymbal kind of motions when people are just maybe in initial research phase, or they're even pre that. So all you have to do is just be there, but be there in the way that they need you to be there. If they're researching, have some useful content for them. If they're getting a consideration set together, show how you compare feature for feature, head to head with some people they're logically to be looking at, et cetera, instead of this kind of buy messaging from the get-go all up and down the funnel.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
We call it horses for courses. That's the way we think of it.
Horses for courses. What do you mean by that?
Horse for courses means like make the right thing for where we are in the process. So if somebody again is researching, be super useful. Help them research actually. Let them come to whatever conclusion they're going to come to. Because if you sort of oversell them at the upper funnel, when they get down to the lower funnel, eventually you'll get found out and you'll have just wasted a bunch of time and money anyway. So give them what they need when they need it in the form factor they need it is basically what horses for courses is.
Got it. Got it. I like that. Horses for courses. Um, and so, it's one of the great challenges of marketing, I think, meeting people where they are in that
Yeah.
buying process. Uh, and of course, it's different by channel, right? Like it might be a little bit easier on your website than it is maybe out in the wild on social media.
Yeah.
Do you have any special techniques for like how do you know whether they're in research mode or consideration set making? Like how do you actually before you even ask like, hey, how can I help them? You kind of have to know where they are. How do you guys handle that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways. The first thing is there's some really good sort of intent tools out there now that tell you when people are sort of researching or your name's coming up in various searches. They're on G2 if you're talking about software, whatever the case is. So there is some data out there and some software that can help you know, like, hey, we have somebody who might be starting to circle the boat out there. You might want to, be aware of that.
Eh,
So that's the first thing. We try to leverage that. And then we bump that up against our sort of database of named accounts and be like, is this somebody that we're really interested in talking to? Is it a good fit, right shape and size, et cetera? The other thing that we do, and honestly, it's a lot more effective than the first, is we're just truly blessed to have a lot of customers who are very sort of forthcoming. And it's like, so tell us, how did you get here? Now you're a Blue Kind of customer. That's awesome. What was your consideration set? What were the steps you took? Tell me about the dark funnel, which, we really don't have much line of sight into at all, hence the name dark funnel. How long did it take you from the time you got greenlit for budget in your organization to the time you made a decision? And so we really try to talk to our customers about their journey and then look for sort of lookalikes out there or use that to inform our approach.
It's not the secret to most people, but it's still for some reason something that people don't do enough of or at all. It's spend an insane amount of time asking questions to your potential customers. Spend an insane amount of time, more than reasonable, digging for what is it that they really need. And as you do so, learn how to do it so you uncover the difference between the wants and the needs. Something I've learned in product discovery. The wants and the needs are two very different beasts.
Yeah,
And if you don't do your job right, you're gonna get the wants, but not the needs. And the needs are what you are out to solve for.
interesting. All right, I like that. That's a really interesting play. Give me an example of that. Like either I mean, it could be, with regard to Agora Pulse, or it could be in a previous lifetime, but can you think of an example where you were asking an almost ridiculous number of questions and then finally got to the truth of what they needed, and it was like
Yeah, there's an overall rule when you are doing customer discovery. When you are doing discovery, whatever it is intended for, ever intended for to improve your product or to sell, as if you're a salesperson or an SDR, discovery is getting to the real reason why someone needs you or may need you. And most of the time, the problem is people do not um, know the reason themselves.
yeah,
It's hidden in there somewhere, but they cannot express it to you in the way it should be expressed.
yeah,
And you have the task of figuring this out. And in order to figure it out, you have to do something that is not intuitive, and you have to learn. That's a skill you have to learn. And that skill usually is about making them tell the story of how they did something in the past, or how they tried to solve something in the past that they need solving, and
Hmm.
make you describe it to you in a way that you send them back to that moment in the past and say, okay, how did you feel at that time? Like, why did you do it this way? Oh, I asked my brother for a little. Okay, why did you choose your brother, and not someone else? Which sounds, that's a weird question to ask, but you really have to go into the very bottom of why they do things the way they do it to
Hmm.
understand the need. And if you don't do that, then all you're going to get is the want. And the want is, I want reports on my social media. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Okay, tell me the last time you search for answers in a social media reporting. Tell me about that. Where did you go? What did you do? What did you look for? And da, da, da. And then from that conversation, you keep asking, but why did you do it this way? What was missing at the time? Instead of telling them, what kind of report do you need? Because if you do that, you're going to have the want, and you're not gonna go for the need. And it's quite interesting. Let's just to take I need better reporting on my social media.
Yeah.
Okay, what does that look like? What kind of report do you need? What kind of report do you want me to give you? Or what kind of graph do you need? That's going to give you the want. But if you want the need, which is I need to shine with my boss, I need to
Yeah.
prove to my customer that my fee is justified, or that kind of, which is kind of unrelated to the report itself, but it's like the consequence of why you need it. Like, you need it for something, not for
Yeah.
it in itself, but for the consequence of it, or the impact of it. Then you're going to start building the reporting differently. You go, oh, okay, so does your boss care about da 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 da? Oh, no, they don't. They just want to see X and Y. Okay, then we're gonna have something very focused on X and Y, because that's what we know your boss will understand. And my boss doesn't get engagement. Okay, engagement will go in the bottom of the report. What do they care
Yeah.
about? They care about traffic. Okay, we'll put traffic up. So, like, that's how you're going to be able to articulate how the solution you build for them look like and behave, and in,
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense to them, because suddenly they say, oh, that's exactly what I needed, but they couldn't express it to you. They had to go through, I think I want this, I think I need this, but it's because based on my limited knowledge of your product and your world and your expertise, this is what I can see. But obviously, it's usually not very elaborated, because they don't know what you know as much as you do. So you have to make them talk about how they do it, to go deep into the reason why they do it this way and the reason why it's broken.
Yeah. So for me, the biggest secret to success in marketing has been paying attention. I'm going to borrow a great story from Tony Fadell, who's the revered product designer at Apple. He kind of created the iPod and the iPhone. And the story said, he talks about a scene in the movie Blues Brothers, where John Belushi and, goes to Dan Aykroyd's apartment for the first time in Chicago, and he enters it, and this is a small, crampy place, and there's a train track 3 feet away, and he sits down on the bed. A train can passes by, the entire apartment rattles, and John says to Dan, it's like, how often does that happen? And Dan said, well, so often I don't even notice. And something falls off the wall. And kind of reminds us that we all sort of creatures of habit. We get used to things around us. And that's a great thing, because it allows you to kind of, focus on a thing that are changing in the world.
Yeah.
But it also means you get blind. So I think a marketer job in my mind is to draw down those blinders and see the obvious. So see the minutiae of customer behavior, because that's where great insights come from.
Yeah.
So I'll take a kind of example from just Dashlane. We were recently launching a video campaign, targeting IT admins. We're trying to educate them about Dashlane and a unique approach to security. You want to tell them, like, yeah, why we are better, because employees love us. We're simple to use, simple to deploy. And we are the most secure and private And oh, by the way, we got to make the IT admin the hero because they're the one who's buying this product, and so when you wrote the brief, and I'm sure many of us have gone through these briefs, and the creative team looked at it and saying, well, how do I communicate that in 15 seconds and still be compelling and engaging and break through?
Yeah.
And we went through a couple of iterations, and nothing was landing. So we paused and we said, well, let's draw down the blinders and just sort of really pay attention to what is it that we do that creates that magic moment for these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And, after a couple of conversations, we autofill passwords. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you autofill password, it makes it easy because it just automatically fills the password. You can make complicated password. You don't have to remember. It makes you secure, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. So, and so we created a character called autofill, OTTOPHIL,
Oh,
and
that's
built a
funny.
story around him and made him the hero. And it came out great. We just launched the campaign. It's beating all the YouTube benchmarks. So, to close it, I would say the secret is paying attention. And that has worked very well for me.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's naturally difficult. And when I say naturally, I mean like at the human psyche level, because when you go back to your example with the Bellucci brothers, like our brains are made to block things out that are minutia, right? And the reason is because our brains don't have the bandwidth to pay attention to everything, right? And so that's
Exactly.
like a survivalist characteristic of what happens with our brain. And that's why, like when you're driving, there's so many things to pay attention to. If you were paying attention to all of them, you would crash, right?
Exactly.
So this is something where our brains are literally wired to start ignoring things that we see every single day. So I mean, I think
That's exactly it.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that's like, so one thing we always do here is peer-to-peer account reviews, because if like we're an agency, right? So say that you're working on the same client for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you develop those blinders in a big way. And so you can have somebody come behind you who is even less experienced than you, but look at that account with a brand new, fresh set of eyes and see some really obvious things that, even like the more senior level marketer missed. So that's actually a really powerful secret, I think.
Yeah.
And
And to build on that, Chris, that's one of the techniques we use. And I take the example, you take a glass of water and you put a drop of red color in it and it turns red. Similarly, if you bring in one fresh person in the conversation who has it opens the eyes for other people, because we're all wired to really, that allows us to navigate better in life, to ignore the minutiae. So
yeah,
it's great.
yeah, absolutely. So my mind is wandering toward the how, right? Like, how could we do this? So, like one example that you brought up is, the food coloring, drop a red dot in there, bring a new um, voice into the conversation. Do you have any other techniques for how to do this type of a thing?
Yeah, a couple of things, and you have to be intentional about it because, as you said, we all wired to ignore, the minutia. I mean, number one is giving yourself the permission and the people around you to question the fundamental, like question assumptions that you don't even think about, and being intentional about it. So you're not doing it because you're critiquing. You're doing it because that is part of the act. For example, just yesterday, we kind of working on a new idea. We did an 1.5-hour session called "Destroy the Idea," where the whole purpose of we were like 8-9 people, was just to go question every assumption that we made because we thought that was a great idea. So that's one technique. I think the second is what we just talked about. So introducing another angle, another person who has nothing to do with this, who really comes at it, and as you just kind of shared an example, brings a completely fresh outlook and then kind of empowers everybody else to look in a fresh way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the third is where it's always great to kind of do pattern recognition or lean into something that you see or heard somewhere else. And it could be another business. It could be another situation. It could be sports. It could be things that you're passionate about in life, but finding a parallel to because consumers and people behave the same way, right? So I think those are kind of three things that at least I've found in ways you can allow yourself to really draw those blinders down.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us here today. For show notes and other episodes, visit us at revenuedrivencmo.com. That's revenuedrivencmo.com. And hey, exclusive for listeners of this podcast, Web Mechanics will do 10 to 20 hours of work for you for free. Literally no sales calls, no BS. Just give them a problem and they will put a team to work for you for free for 10 to 20 hours. Even if you're already a client. If you're struggling with demand gen, lead gen, SEO, SEM, Google ads, LinkedIn ads, conversion optimization, if you can't get Facebook or Meta ads to work for the life of you, or you can't figure out attribution, Web Mechanics will take a good hard look at whatever problem you give them, whatever programs you put in front of them, and they will give you an objective, informed opinion, plus some advice from 10 to 20 hours of senior level attention. And that's just because you're a listener of this podcast. So I would suggest take them up on this offer. It's ridiculous. Go to revenuedrivencmo.com/free, fill out the 2-minute form, and you will not regret it. Literally zero downside, unlimited potential for growth. So do yourself a favor, revenuedrivencmo.com/free, no hyphens, no punctuations. You will be happy about that decision.